Ladies and gentlemen, episode 64 of the podcast is brought to you by Onnit, ONNIT.com/hot. So, what is Onnit? I'm going to describe them as a strength and conditioning, health and wellness juggernaut. That's the word I'm going to choose for today. I look at them as the one-stop shop for where I get the supplements that I use on damn near a daily basis. And before I go any further, I try to do this every time when I talk about supplementation. Supplements in general, if you're getting quality, are not the cheapest thing in the world. And long before you start looking at spending extra money at supplementing your diet or your training routine, don't do me a favor. Do yourself a favor and square away the things that you can that cost nothing in comparison to the supplements. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you eat like a garbage can, it doesn't matter what supplement you take, right? If you take a bunch of supplements but you don't train, it's also not going to really matter. So dial in the things that you can. Get your sleep dialed in, get your training dialed in, dedicate yourself to a program or create a program you can stick to, eat good quality food, and then you can start looking at the micro aspect, which I consider to be supplements. Now, if you want to support a company that supports the podcast and makes awesome supplements, then you need to go to Onnit, onnit.com/hot. You'll know you're at the right place because you're going to land on a landing page that has the podcast logo and says receive 10% off when you check out. And vertically, if you scroll down, it's going to go through the products that I mentioned the most often, the Alpha Brain, Total Human, MCT oil, and the Onnit 6 Bodyweight program, which is a program designed for minimal gear. And I would say minimal amount of time as well. But on the top, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Supplement foods, fitness apparel, sale, all that good stuff. So shop to your heart's delight. But like I said, control the things first that don't cost you any money, because I don't want you to waste your money. This podcast is also brought to you by Free Range American. If you don't know what Free Range American is, go to www.freerangeamerican.us and find out. It's a brand dedicated to celebrating the freedoms that we are so very fortunate to have here in the U.S. Full disclosure, obviously this is my company, so it's not really brought to you by or sponsored by. I'm just talking to you about something that I'm very passionate about. It's a brand that stands for what I believe in. Freedom, with that responsibility as well, right? Because just because you have the right or the freedom doesn't mean that you are absent of responsibility or burden or accountability. But it's a celebration of all the amazing opportunities that we have here in this country. And actually the reason I bring it up is if you're going to order something for your significant other and you actually want it to arrive before Christmas, you need to order that, I would say, within the next 7 to 10 days. And currently, as I'm recording this intro, it is the 9th of December. You don't have 7 to 10 days. Well, you don't have 10. You have until the 17th, if I'm looking at the Postal Service website. So if you want to get something for your significant other, you have a limited amount of time. And if you don't want to get something for your significant other, that's awesome too. Just saying. If you do, get on it. www.freerangeamerican.us. And that is all on the business side of the house. My guest today is Ryan Michler, and he and I met originally through the power of the internet, and then finally met face-to-face this year, 2018, at the Total Archery Challenge in Salt Lake City. Actually, specifically, I think we met at the it's not the Hoyt Range, it's the Easton Range in Salt Lake City. So it was a connection face-to-face that was through archery. Dudley was doing a clinic. I was there trying to absorb information from Dudley's clinic, as I always do. And Ryan happened to be there. He is an interesting cat. I love what this guy is doing. So he is the creator and founder of an organization called Order of Man. And if you want to look that up, go to www.order, like you're going to do a Chinese food order, of man, orderofman.com. He describes it in the podcast, so I'm not going to go incredibly in depth as to what it is, but what I will say is I really like what he has going on. It's a resource and a reference and a community specifically for men, even though the concepts I think apply to all human beings, but it's a community and a resource and a reference for men who want to up their game when it comes to being a guy, being a man, being a father, being a husband, being in a relationship. Accountability, responsibility, integrity, all of those buzzwords resonate with me. I love talking about them. They're some of my favorite topics. So it took me long enough, but I finally nailed them down. And we talked about quite a few things, to include Order of Man. And like I said, if you want to check it out, orderofman.com. And here comes episode 64 with Ryan Michler.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north to south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
All right, man, are you ready?
I'm ready when you are.
All right, so obviously I have a lot of questions about Order of Man, but first, as I was thinking about this coming up, knowing we were going to connect, there was two much more critical topics that I needed an update on. First, your archery journey. Tell me where you are.
Struggling.
Oh, so you're an archer. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. It's so much harder than I thought it would be. I actually only started hunting last year. It was December of last year. I picked up a bow for the first time in 2016. And then I had a buddy call me up and he's like, "Hey man, you want to go on a hunt?" I'm like, "You realize I'm not a hunter, right?" He's like, "Yeah, that's why I want you to come." So he took me down to Texas. He had a friend who had some property down there, and we did a rifle and a bow hunt. And the first day I was there, I shot my first ever animal with my rifle. And then the next day I shot my first ever animal with my bow. And I'm like, "Oh, this is easy."
So let me guess, Texas, potentially there were some fences involved?
No fences, but they were feeding the animals.
Okay, so and I ask because, I mean, a lot of people, I'm neither here nor there. I mean, people want to go do that type of hunting or don't, that's great. But I took my son for the first hunt that he ever did, and I was talking to him right over his shoulder in a very similar scenario. And it made it so much easier to expose him to it because it was very controlled.
For sure. Yeah. And I think there's definite value to it. You know, there's value to spot and stalk and to sitting in a blind and sitting in a tree and everything else. But it just didn't work out that way for me. But they were feeding them, and it was pretty controlled. They managed the land really, really well, although there were no fences.
Yeah, it's a unique experience, and there definitely, in my opinion, is some pros to exposing people like that. Like I said, for my son, to be able to sit right behind him and talk him through the whole process, it's something I'll never forget. That was amazing.
Yeah, and I think there's value to early wins anytime you do something right. I just took my son on a hunt about a month ago to Texas. No fences again involved, but the land was managed well.
Yep.
And we were hunting white-tailed does is what we could shoot because of the property we were on, and as many pigs as we wanted. And he was shooting with a crossbow, and we didn't have. It was awesome. It was so awesome. We didn't have an opportunity at a deer, but we had one opportunity at a group of pigs, and he took a killer shot on a pig, and I even got it on video. And we watched it, and he had the luminoc on the back, so we could see like where it hit. I'm like, dude, that's a perfect shot. And I had no doubt in my mind that we'd go recover this pig. And we spent so much time looking for that thing. We had some friends who even had tracking dogs because we were doing a thing called hog dogging. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before. That's
I have not, actually.
I'll talk to you about that in a minute. It's pretty cool. Anyway, so we could never find the pig, man. I was so disappointed because I wanted him to have that early victory, but unfortunately we couldn't recover the pig.
I don't think people realize how tough hogs or javelinas are, because we had that same experience when I had my son down in Texas. We were doing blind hunting in the morning and the evening, and the rest of the day we could kind of cruise around on the property. And of course, he saw a group, or I don't know what they call for hogs or javelinas, a herd. And all he wanted to do all day long was be out there looking for them. And multiple times I'm sitting there watching, I'm like, oh, that thing's definitely dead. And it just ghosted us. Totally ghosted us.
It's crazy. They're so tough and they're so resilient. And then they have that armor. I can't remember what that armor is called, that kind of drapes over their shoulder and vital.
The plate. I think it's the shield or the plate, but it's I mean, with the bow, I've seen a lot of people, basically critiquing arrow penetration. And I think Dudley got a little bit tired of it one day and was like, "Listen, do you guys have any idea? You're basically shooting through body armor." So,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Shush.
Yeah, when I was out in Hawaii earlier this year, one of my buddies shot a pig out there, and we recovered the pig. And the guy we were with was showing us how to break down the hog, right? And he showed us that thing. It's this thick, like big, thick piece of, well, it looks like cartilage. I think it's cartilage, and it's pretty intense for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it essentially is body armor for the
Yeah.
side, at least.
Yeah.
So, what were they doing? The hogging and dogging? What
Oh
is
yeah,
that?
hog dogging. So this is crazy. I'd heard about it. I hadn't ever participated in it until this event. But yeah, this guy came out and he had 4 dogs with him, and 2 of his dogs are tracking dogs, and they've got the collars on them, so they're on GPS. And then he just follows them. So he lets the dogs go, and they bay up a hog essentially. And so I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, because you can't tree a hog, you know? So I'm like, what
Yeah.
are you talking about? And he's like, well, eventually the hog just gets tired. The dogs run him down, and it gets tired. It turns around, they bay up, so they just stop and think they need to fight. Well, then they release the quote unquote catch dogs. So the catch dogs go out and basically catch and pin down the hog, and you go up and you stab it with a knife. It's crazy.
I have seen videos of that. Yeah, don't they actually, the catch dogs physically attach themselves to the hog somehow, right? They're biting
Yeah,
sometimes the ears or the
they
leg.
usually
It
get
can
the
get,
ears. They usually get the
yeah.
ears. Yeah.
Yeah, before anybody goes and searches that on YouTube, just understand what you're getting yourself into. It's probably more intense than most people are going to want to search for.
It's intense, and you know what's even crazy is just the sound of that pig. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, just the sound alone is wild. Like it'll rock you if you're not ready for that.
Agreed. So the bow stuff. Have you been bow hunting this season?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't had much success. But,
Oh, so you're a bow
but
hunter too.
yeah,
Perfect.
yeah. No, I actually missed a really good shot. I shouldn't say shot. I missed a good opportunity on a big whitetail in Minnesota this year. I was in a tree stand for 3 days. Didn't have much opportunity, although there was a ton of action. I just didn't have a whole lot of opportunity. And the last night I was out there, this nice 8-point walks out, and he's about 25 yards. And I draw back my bow. Well, I had been watching this other buck. We called him Shorty. Really short tines, but wide rack.
Yep.
I drew back on this 8-point, nice 8-point, mature 8-point. I saw out of the corner of my eye Shorty come out of the woods, and I'm not
Oh,
it was like the heavens parted and the angels sang hallelujah, and I let down my draw, and because I wanted this other deer, right? So
yep.
in hindsight, I should have taken the first shot I had. So this 8-point walks on, and Shorty's walking the same path. So I'm like, oh, he's coming right here. He's coming right here. And I'm so new to it, and I freaked myself out, quite honestly. I just freaked myself out. I was so excited. And I'm watching, and I'm like, okay, he's going to stop right where this other thing stopped. And he didn't stop, and he kept going, and he was just kept moving. And I didn't even, for whatever reason, it didn't even register for me to man or call him or anything to get him to stop for a second. And
Yeah.
he just walked right on by, and I didn't take a shot. I blew it. I blew it. And it was really frustrating. He's been haunting my dreams for the past couple of months now.
Did you experience as he walked by and you lost the shot that sensation of just kind of being overwhelmed because of the velocity with which things were happening?
Well, that's the crazy thing. I think I just had this assumption that it's easy, right? You just go out and you just sit there and you just shoot it. And when
I
you're
think
at
a
it,
lot of people have the assumption it's easy until they have a bow in their hand.
well, and it's when else is easy. It's easy when you're out in your yard and you're shooting at a bag. Like it's super easy just to put it on target every time, right?
Yeah,
But then
in a
you get out in
controlled
the field-
environment where you're
Yeah.
on your time. Yeah.
Right. And it's moving and it's got fur and you're going to take a life. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I know what this is actually like. And it puts a whole lot of perspective and respect for, ancient hunters who were doing this with tools that they weren't, fabricating in a shop or whatever, that they were
Like
actually
when we did the Hoyt tour. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah.
CNC machines, the carbon fiber, the cam systems. I'm
And
actually,
everything's like well researched and it's done. It's like scientific, right? It's pretty crazy.
I'm still blown away by the people who choose to use a recurve bow and are shooting instinctually. I mean, it's hard enough as it is with that technology and a movable sight and a rangefinder, and then you can take it a step even closer to that ancient man with the recurve, and you're just, I feel like it's lined up. And to go through all of that effort and to be a little bit off, that would be, that'd be probably a bridge too far for me. I'm frustrated enough most days when I'm out there bow hunting.
And it's hard because you have these archers and bow hunters who are like, well, they speak down on rifle hunters, for example, and it's like, well, this is real hunting. It's like, well, is it really? Like because yours is all machined, like my bow's dialed in. It's scientific. It's measured down to the nth degree, right? So like you could pick apart anything, and I don't critique anybody who goes out there and works for his food.
Yeah, people just get a little bit too tied to the things they're passionate about, and they want to
Yeah,
overlay their passion on other people's.
for sure.
Um, have you gone out for elk at all near Salt Lake?
Never. There was an opportunity this year. I don't think that opportunity will present itself, but next year I have plans to go out for elk.
The first bull that I've only been bow hunting for about a year. I started in August of 2017, so I'm just over a year. But
Yeah.
the first bull that I got was up near Park City, and I disagree with Rogan on the fact that you should share the public land places that you get bulls. So we can talk about that one offline because he's off the list. No, don't tell
Yeah.
Joe any secrets.
Yeah. So he says you should share or should not share.
So when the last podcast that he and Dudley were on, let's say they came to a philosophical disagreement about whether or not you should talk to people about your special hunting spots.
Okay. Yeah.
And Dudley was like, no, dude, you don't tell people the secret spots. And Joe was like, nah, it's public land. Tell everybody. Dudley's like, okay, you're off the list.
That's what I lean more towards what Dudley's saying. Like if you have a special fishing hole or a hunting hole, then that's your hole. Like you got to protect that resource you've got.
Yeah, by not rattling your mouth off to everybody. You don't have to build a
Like you're
fence
not
around
physically
it.
going to keep people out, but just keeping it quiet is important, I think, for sure.
Yeah. No, it's cool to hear, man, that you're into it at least. I mean, we got to shoot together a little bit at the Total Archery Challenge. That was
a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun, and man, that was the angles and the shots on that. Whew, man, that was challenging and expensive with carbon fiber shattering just about everywhere.
Well, it was more expensive for me because I made the cardinal sin, and I don't even want to say it, but I've already started.
Yeah, now you're going to.
Yeah, I actually dry fired my bow at the Total Archery Challenge.
No way.
Yeah.
I have drawn my bow back and then realized I didn't have an arrow knocked, and then quickly let down and looked around to make sure nobody else caught it, but it was in my backyard by myself. But yeah, it's my dad. I gave him my what was it? A Hoyt Carbon Defiant,
Mm-hmm.
first bow that I had ever gotten.
Yeah.
And although I wasn't there, I heard through the rumor mill that he chose to dry fire it, and it came unwound off the cams on him, so he had to replace the strings.
But it didn't crack or the limbs or anything like that?
No, it just unwound the strings, which probably were due for reset anyway. So he went to a local archery shop and got another set ordered, and actually got a doe this year in Montana. He came up on his first ever bow hunt. Of course, success on the first one. So he probably thinks he's a Jedi now, and
yep,
we'll see how it goes
those
for the
hunting gods, just getting you into the sport, and then they're going to tease you the next couple of years by not giving you anything.
Yeah, they're like, oh, come on, yeah, book your tickets.
This is easy. It's easy.
So the second critical topic, how's your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu journey going?
That's been good. That's been really good. I started that. Let's see. I started probably about 5 or 6 months ago, and I really started because you know Origin. You're linked up with those guys, Pete and Brian, and those guys over there.
Well, I know of Origin, and my only connection with him, I guess, would be through Jocko, because I don't want to speak for him, but I think he's either an investor or has a relationship with them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So Pete reached out to me. He's the founder of Origin, and he wanted to get involved in what we were doing, believed in what we were doing, and so we connected. And I'd always kind of thought like this would be a good idea. We actually run jiu-jitsu training at some of the events that we do. And so I've got a buddy who fights MMA, amateur MMA, and he's been telling me, hey, come do it. And I thought, well, this is probably about the time to do it. And got involved about 6 months or so ago, and then went out to Maine to train with those guys for a week. And that was hell, but it was also awesome. Like it hasn't been for me since high school that I've like gotten in any sort of like physical altercation with another human being who's trying to do as much harm to you as you're trying to do to that person. So I think there's real
which
value.
Which is a beautiful thing. But I also, and I totally, so you and I started about the same time. I've been going for about 5 or 6 months as well. And I avoid violence like the plague. I'll walk away. I'll buy you a beer, whatever it is. I don't want to I don't want to voluntarily participate in that environment unless I
Sure.
have to, but you have to make sure that doesn't lull you into not being prepared for that environment. And I think because most people don't experience violence, they're like, yeah, whatever. It's not an important skill. And then I started jujitsu. I was like, oh, so I can't do anything unless you allow me to. I
Yes.
don't understand.
Yeah. That's what's so frustrating is I went in the first day and the way that our classes are broke down, we get some instruction on some basic technique or whatever it may
Yep.
be, or specific move or counter or whatever. And then we basically have, open roll or mat time. So we're just rotating between guys. We're doing 3-minute rounds and the instructor says, here, I'll put you up with this guy. And so what do? We size guys up, right?
Of course.
Initially that's what you do. So this guy's probably got, I've probably got 40 pounds, like no joke, 40 pounds on this guy. Kind of a spindly, wiry guy. I mean, he looks fit, but he's small. He's weak. And
He's a nerd assassin
exactly. And I didn't know about the assassin part till they said go.
until the simulated murder began.
It was crazy. I'm like, how is this little scrawny dude doing this to me? And I couldn't do anything. I think as guys, we have these visions like, oh, if I'm ever in some kind of altercation, I'll kick his ass. And it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, 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 whoa. Like you're overestimating your skill set here. And it's going to get you into a world of hurt, which actually leads to your point that you talked about is like trying to avoid violence. I think those who have a familiarity with it and understand it, at least to some degree, are less likely to engage in it voluntarily because they know the stakes. It's those guys who don't get involved, who run their mouths and get themselves into situations they have no idea what they're actually getting into.
The same is true with firearms as well. People who really devote themselves, like, yes, owning a firearm in this country is a right. I totally support it. I do wish that the conversation would be more balanced between the right and the burden, because carrying a weapon, although it is a right, has a burden of, training, currency, and competency, and all those things that go along with it. And those that devote themselves to actually achieving those levels of proficiency are, in my opinion, and from what I have seen, so less likely to use it or to walk away because they understand the burden and the consequence. And I absolutely see that with jiu-jitsu or any other martial art, have heavy emphasis on the martial as opposed to the art. Because, I mean, if you look at, I don't know if I've ever actually seen a fight other than a random cold cocking in the street, which may have broken the person's hand, but it's both people take damage of some kind, and that has to be respected. And the more time you have in a training environment getting banged up, you're like, no, what? This actually isn't worth it. And because I know how to handle myself, I actually don't even want to engage with this person, even though I know I could crush him.
Yeah, it's you don't have anything to prove at that point, because I think there's a lot to be said for the confidence of jiu-jitsu, because although I'm not a master, obviously I don't know if anybody truly is, I have a level of confidence that says to me and puts me in a position where, like, I don't have to prove anything to you. Like, I feel confident where I'm at. I feel confident with my growth, and there's no reason I have to go out there and prove anything to anybody.
Yeah, that's a really good place to be, in my opinion, between the ears. That level of confidence. So where do you train?
I'm in Southern Utah, so there's a gym, Ace Martial Arts here, and about 30 minutes away. And my boy just got into it, my second son. I make sure my kids are involved every year. Every season, they're involved in one physical sport each season.
Yep.
So this season, my second son chose martial arts. So he just got involved in it too. They've got a great little program there. So it's really cool to get him involved, and we wrestle around and roll at night. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have the exact same experience. Full disclosure, I have a buddy who honestly just wouldn't shut up about it. And the only way I could get him to stop talking about it was to go to the gym and check it out. And then as soon as I just got worked by everybody, I'm like, all right, there's legitimacy to this. And then in my head, I was thinking, I'm 41. There's more value in this for my kids, both of my sons. I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old. And then the biggest one in the back of my head was my daughter, because at some point in time, she's going to be forced throughout her life to deal with a situation. She's going to need the ability to have that confidence and the ability to know how to handle herself. And it took me about 5 months, but now I have both boys and my daughter and my wife involved at the gym. So
Awesome.
Chess game, checkmate. They thought we were playing checkers, but it was chess.
I love it, man. Anytime you can get your family involved, it's just better. I mean, I did that with working out about 5 years ago. I started CrossFit, and and my wife didn't go for a while. She a couple pregnancies in there and everything else. And so I finally talked her into it. And now, I mean, just the fact that she does it actually motivates and inspires me when I'm not feeling like doing it. So anytime you can get your family involved in an activity like that, I think it's really, really powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And I love rolling with my kids. Like I was rolling with my daughter 2 nights ago, and I was laughing so hard the entire time, and she's laughing. But at the same time, you're teaching and having that connection. It was something that I was looking forward to, and I knew would eventually happen. And now I'm like, downstairs, how many mats could we?
That would be. I know. I've thought the same thing. I've got our house doesn't facilitate that necessarily, but I've got a 1,500 square foot shop out back. Yep. And we actually bought my wife's grandfather's home. He built it in the mid 70s, and she's always wanted this home. And we had an opportunity to purchase it when they passed away. And he's got this amazing shop that he used to work out of, and I've turned it into a gym. And then it became kind of like, where I just had my tools, right? And then I put my scout out there, and then now it's kind of turning into my bow shop. And now I'm wondering how I can get some mats in there as well. So it's like the ultimate man cave out there.
I dig it. Plus, if you can't fit the mats out there, don't be afraid to take the couch out of the living room. And then when your wife's gone, obviously, send her on a 2 or 3 day trip and like, oh, hey, honey, look what I added to the kitchen mats. It's awesome.
We always do the WWE thing. We take all the cushions off the couch and bounce around in there. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Before we get into the Order Man stuff, I got to ask about that Origin camp, because I got a couple buddies who were talking about going next year. You went for the full week, right? Even though there was
all week,
and it was the choice was you could have gone for 2 or 3 days, but you decided
there was 2 sessions. So there's a I can't even remember, a Monday through Wednesday session, and then like a Thursday through Saturday session. So yeah, I decided to go out there for the full thing, and I was beat, man. I was worn down. Like my joints, my elbows in particular, were really feeling it. But I'm glad I went. I'm really glad I went, because I crammed so much time and focus from some high level black belts that I just wouldn't have exposure to otherwise. So, and just the opportunity on the mats. And I think at the end of the day, that's really what it is. It's just mat time, right? Like you just got to put in the time. Like I've got a little book right here, the University of Jiu-Jitsu University, I think is what it's called. And, it's great. I think it's important to get some foundational information through reading and, consuming that information. But man, unless you're actually engaged in the activity, you're never going to learn as good.
The best analogy or description I heard was pressure testing. You could read all the books, you could watch all the YouTube videos, but until you can pressure test it against a human being that's trying to prevent it, it's because there is a difference. Like same thing, you go to a foundations class and you work on something under no pressure, and then all of a sudden you're trying to do your special move on the mat. You're like, okay, maybe I'll get to that later.
Could you please move your arm here so that I can?
I'll actually ask people that on the mat while I'm laughing. Like, excuse me, sir, can I hold on to your gi for a little bit?
It's funny.
They love it.
It's true, man. It is such an intense thing. And we just, like I said earlier, man, we overestimate ourselves. Like we just think that we're so great. We're smarter, we're stronger, we're better than we actually are. And man, unless you're out in the field testing it out, you're selling yourself short.
Well, the realization I came to quickly is how little you need to know more than somebody else to be able to do whatever you want to do. Like if you know 1% more, you're not, the person that you're encountering is completely screwed. And I don't think most people realize that.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. I mean, it's absolutely, which is great. I've heard a lot of people just through my work, a lot of guys will say, oh, I hate that I'm raising a kid right now. And it's like, I love it because my kids are going to dominate because the competition is so minimal right now. You just have to be that much better or exert that extra 1% and you will excel every time.
Yeah. It puts people back on their heels and they don't understand, like, how did you do that? I'm like, well, practice, exposure, Yeah.
I have a lot of guys laugh at even about the podcast, they'll say like, cause our podcast is done relatively well. And surprisingly for me, well, and people ask like, well, how do you do, I've talked about this, and I'll go and I'll look at their stuff and it's like, man, they're so sporadic and they don't treat it like a professional activity. It's like, I've done over 300 episodes and I've never, ever in that time missed a single podcast episode. So it has nothing to do with some sort of gift that I have been bestowed upon at birth. It's just I'm consistent and treat it professionally, and inevitably you produce the results that way.
Yeah, 300 without missing a publication date is unbelievable. I mean, I actually remember you put a post up about that. I don't know, a couple months ago, where it's like, the day is coming up. I need to get it done, so I'm devoting the time. And I mean, I've missed a few windows just because life gets in the way.
Sure,
But
of
it's
course.
definitely the consistent. But again, the consistency and treating it like it's something professional, even though it might be a secondary or tertiary thing or activity you're involved in, I think is really important.
I mean, if you're going to do it, like do it. Even if you're just picking up a hobby, if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, well, I want to go pick up a bow. Okay, good. You can have this hobby, but treat it right. Like pay it the attention that it deserves. And if you're not going to give it that attention, if you're going to dabble, just don't. Just do something else that engages you that you can actually be consistent with. And I'm not talking about every day. I'm just talking about having a consistent schedule.
And paying it the respect it deserves, like you said.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So on that note, let's talk a little about Order of Man, and I'm just going to turn it over to you. And I mean, I'll give you some broad questions, and then you can fill it in however you want to. And the biggest one is though, why did you decide to create Order of Man, and when did you decide to do so? So if you could just tell the origin story of that, and all the way up to where you are now, that'd be amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a financial advisor by trade. I've been in the business for a little over 10 years, right around 10 years. I actually got, so what I did is I had a good job before my National Guard unit got activated to Iraq in 2005. And so my wife moved back home. We were 6 months married at the time.
Hmm.
I went to Ramadi. I was gone for a year and a half, 6 months stateside training, and then a year deployment overseas. And we realized, man, I just didn't want to go back to that job. So we did the only reasonable thing that you do. You just buy and build a house without a job so that you figure it out along the way. So
I think
that's
they
what,
call that sliding all of your chips in on the
yes,
gambling table.
yes, that's what we did. And so my wife built this home while I was gone, and she did an amazing job. But I was
Oh
like,
wow.
okay, now I was stupid. I'm like, now, and unfortunately, it worked out, in hindsight.
Yeah.
But I got back from Iraq for a leave. I think I was home for maybe like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks tops, something like that. And I had met with a financial advisor because we had saved a lot of money at the time, and we weren't paying taxes, right? My wife was living
Yep.
with her parents at the time, and we were just saving money. So he's like, "Hey, by the way, I'm looking to hire 2 advisors for my firm." I said, "Oh, okay, well that sounds good." So I took all of my study materials back to Iraq with me and studied that stuff in my downtime, and came back and passed my exams and did that for about 10 years. And I liked it. I mean, it was fulfilling, it was rewarding, but I started to feel a disconnect between, what I was doing and how I was actually serving people. Not that I was out of integrity, just that it just wasn't like speaking to me the way that I felt like something
Yep.
should. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I had built up a fairly successful financial planning practice. I actually did a podcast because I was looking for new ways to reach out to potential clients of mine. And so I'm like, well, I'll try a podcast. So I tried a podcast. I did about 20 episodes. I'm like, man, I really love this medium. I love podcasting. I just don't want to have this conversation anymore. So
You're tired of the subject
I'm
matter?
so tired of it. I was like, oh, I'm just exhausted talking about the same things over and over again and dealing with the same issues. And I'm not downplaying the importance of financial planning. I'm just saying it just wasn't relevant to me that much anymore. So I thought, well, what could I do? And I'd been listening to a couple of different podcasts, and I thought, I've got some things, and we can get into this backstory a little bit. But I grew up without a permanent father figure. My wife and I went through a separation, a near divorce, and man, I really struggled for a long time. And through some actions I took, and of course, education that I received, and mentoring and friendship, I turned a lot of that around for myself. And so I thought, man, it'd be really cool to talk with high level men about how I can grow my business, my financial planning practice, and how I can get physically fit, and how I can be a better father, because I had a 1-year-old son at the time, at the time of our separation, I should say. And so
Hmm.
I thought, well, we could do a podcast and just talk with these guys. I mean, that'd be incentive enough for some of these guys to come on and talk with me, and I could gain a lot of value from that. So really, I started it selfishly. I just wanted to have good conversations with good guys. And from the minute I put it out there, I mean, it really, really took off. The first episode did significantly better than any podcast I had done before with a financial planning practice. And I found out very, very quickly that the guys really resonated with what I had to share. So my goal from the beginning has always been to equip men with the tools and the resources, conversations, and the accountability to level up in their homes, their businesses, their communities, every facet of life in which they're engaged. So that's what we've been doing for, let's see, since March of 2015. So coming up on 4 years here, pretty close actually.
That's crazy, man. When you were looking at building the platform for Order of Man, did you follow a template that you had seen, or did you basically try to create something to fill a void that you saw that needed to be filled?
I'm dumb enough just to take action sometimes. Like I mean,
So full back dive, head down, full back dive.
it is, and I've done some things where I've lost some money and some time, and made some mistakes. You know, nothing catastrophic that I couldn't overcome, but
Yeah.
but I've also, some of the bets have paid off, and this is one of them. I just thought I want to do a podcast, and I had a little bit of experience because I had those 20 episodes. So I just started a feed, launched the podcast, launched the blog at the same. It wasn't a blog, just launched a website at the same time, and kind of figured it out as I went. And one of the best things I ever did, well, two things I should share because I think this is really valuable, is you got to put yourself around people who are doing what you want to do. And I was knowledgeable enough, I guess, and had enough insight to think, okay, well, where are the guys that are having the kind of conversations I want to have? And there was a couple of conferences that I went to, and made some really good friendships that I still have, powerful friendships that I still have to this day, 4 years later, who really helped give me a leg up and lent me some of their credibility. And I can talk about what that is in a minute, but they allowed me access into what they had already created, which was very generous of them at the time. So I did that. And then I heard on a podcast that you've got to create a community, and the community that you create is really what's going to help you thrive. And so I started a Facebook group about that time. And I think when we started, I had I unsolicited invited these guys. Like, it didn't even have to be invited. I just invited my friends, and a bunch of them left and were pissed and everything else. But I didn't know
Stop spamming me, man.
that's exactly what it was. I'm like, well, okay, I'm sorry. I just didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
There's different ways to do that, I know now. But
Yeah,
now
always
it's on
test
to
new ideas on your friends first.
That's right. Yeah, because they'll get mad at you, but they'll still be your friend, right?
Correct.
But yeah, that group's grown to 53,000 men now, which is just insane. It's crazy. I still question why guys listen to me sometimes, but it's pretty cool.
It is. It's in an interesting world that we live in. So I obviously follow you on social media platforms, and I'm always interested by some of the posts that you put up when people are questioning what it is that you're doing. The classic cliche term, the toxicity, that one comes up, pretty often.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? What's your suspicion on why you think that is?
Why people are negative towards what I'm doing?
Correct. They look at it as, I can't speak for anybody else. I'm not sure exactly what they look at it as, but I would suspect it's either a power trip or a way they look at what you're trying to do as, what's the word that you always hear? The patriarchy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I actually think represents a significantly smaller portion of the reason why people downplay what I do. I mean, there's that. Let's address that. There is that. There's the idea that somehow masculinity is inherently evil or wrong, or all the injustices that it's done to everybody. And I mean, most of us, if you're rational, understand that that's not really the case. Now, have some atrocities been committed by men? Yes, of course. Like, we can't deny that, right? Yep. But to say that it's some patriarchal tyranny, I think, is a little bit misguided and doesn't entirely paint the entire picture, right? Because as much as women have suffered at the hands of men, men have suffered at the hands of men as well. It's basically a human condition. It's our responsibility to combat that, right? You've served for nearly 2 decades, right?
Yeah.
Combating some of these evils that we see. It has nothing to do with masculinity. It has to do with these guys and these people who are toxic, not toxic masculinity, just toxic. We call them assholes, right?
Yeah, and I often find when people describe, if you can pin somebody down and ask them to describe what they consider to be toxic masculinity, the things they are describing are indeed toxic, like the hate and the evil and the actions. Sure. But it doesn't necessarily apply only to men, because when I think of being a man and what I'm trying to raise in my sons, are morals, integrity, standing up for what they believe in, always being able to step into the breach to help somebody else when they should need it. And I can't think of how toxicity would be even remotely tied to those concepts.
I think it's an attempt to paint this really broad brush that says that somehow masculinity in and of itself is what's toxic. And that's the issue I take with it, because it's not. Masculinity, just like femininity, are there to serve us. They're there to help us. So when you look at a guy who's exhibiting masculine behavior, and by the way, women can exhibit masculine behavior too, is I think of strength, resolve, resilience, toughness, grittiness. Jordan Peterson talks a lot about disagreeableness. We can address that.
Yep.
The ability to do violence, competition. Those are the types of things that, when used correctly, can actually produce very, very effective outcomes. So it's my job with my boys, and I have a daughter as well, but it's my job with my boys to help them understand and see how their masculinity is used to serve themselves and serve the people they have an obligation and responsibility for. But in and of itself, it's not toxic. It's just not. So yeah, I think there's a small percentage of people who want to say that masculinity is bad. And I actually didn't believe this because I'd never really been exposed to it, that there's people out there who actually believe that. And just recently, even just over the past couple of weeks, as I continue to share my message, I have found that there's people out there who actually believe that. It's like this mythical story that was out there, hanging out in wherever it hangs out in the corners, and like nobody really ever saw it. And then you are exposed to it. You're like, oh my goodness, there's actually people who really believe this about men. It's crazy, some of the things that I hear and get from people.
Yeah, I suspect that people who are, and again, this is a total assumption on my part, but I know I have certain biases towards certain things based off horrible experiences that I have had. Mm-hmm. So I certainly believe it's possible that people could have a horrific or terrifying experience and then associate or overlay that towards a grander idea or concept. Rational or not, I think that could be the discussion point. But
it's that term that correlation does not equal causation. Right.
Yeah.
So I'll take my mom, for example. My dad chose drugs and alcohol. He was out of the picture by the time I was 3 years old. I had a stepfather come into my life who was an alcoholic, never abusive, but just never really present or available for my mom or for me or my sister. Then I had another stepfather come into my life, and he was verbally and emotionally abusive, very powerful, very charismatic, very successful when it came to business, but used all his gifts and his skill set and abilities to push other people down and make them feel dumb rather than lift other people up. So I had 3 quote unquote father figures in my life who weren't great examples. And she had 3 men come into her life who were not good husbands to her.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be very easy for her to say, oh, see, men are pigs, men are assholes, men are bad.
Well, those ones were.
Those ones were, exactly. So just because it's correlated doesn't mean that's actually like the cause. It doesn't mean that all men are assholes because you had 3 experiences. So people that have negative experiences with men are or jump into this extreme feminist mindset where they think men are inherently evil are typically people who have been damaged by men. And I don't want to dismiss that. They've been sexually abused or traumatized in some way. And I'm not downplaying how traumatic that could be, but that doesn't mean that masculinity or men in and of themselves are inherently evil. It just means you had a tragic, horrific, horrible experience with someone who happened to be a male.
Yeah, and those experiences, depending on the severity, could be, for some people, it's a bridge too far to get back and to cross. Yeah. I totally hear what you're saying, but for Absolutely. Some people, I think it's unrecoverable. So that's why I said I always am interested in the backstory of people who take that stance, because to a degree, I understand it, but I just hope they have at least some gap in their headspace that would allow for them to maybe develop an understanding that not everybody is like that.
Well, and I think that is ultimately their responsibility. Otherwise, they'll live a significantly inferior life because they'll reject a lot of things that could potentially serve them well, like having a partner in the opposite sex, for example. Yep. But I also think there's a level of responsibility on us as men to step up as fathers, husbands, business owners, community leaders, and show the world and the people specifically that we interact with that there are men who are strong and noble and courageous and believe in good things. And the more we can share those stories, the more that I think at first there might be a level of confusion. Like I've always had this preconceived notion about the way men show up because my dad was abusive, sexually or physically or emotionally abusive. And now here's this man who I work with, and he's honorable and he helps people and he's charitable and he's lifting other people up and he's serving where he can serve. And so there's this level of confusion initially, but the more they see that, the more they recognize, oh, my situation was one experience of thousands and thousands or an infinite number of interactions that I can have with people. And I see that there's good and bad. Let's not deny that there's evil, but there's also good in the world.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings, and it's on the back of the cleared hot shirt, is "Be the example." And I talk to my kids, both of my boys and my daughter. I mean, I have the same conversations, but with a slightly different vernacular with her, because she likes ponies and my boys like GI Joes.
Yeah, sure.
But as I'm dropping them off to school, I tell my kids, both of my boys and my daughter, every single day when they get out of the car, stand up for what you believe in, be yourself, and don't look for examples. Set them. And every morning I tell them that, and I always tell them, like, because bullying comes up often. I'm like, listen, here's the deal. If I ever hear that you were bullying somebody, you're going to have your ass in a sling for sure, because that is not tolerated in our house.
Mm-hmm.
But if I also ever hear that you didn't step in to stop somebody from being bullied when you could, you're actually going to be in more trouble.
Yeah,
because
for sure.
you have to, I agree with what you're saying. Like, you need to set the example, and then hopefully that example can draw other people to what, at least in my belief, is correct.
And your example needs to be the loudest, right? Because I'll give you an example. My son, he was having some, not bullying issues, but there was kind of a jerk at school, right? And he came home and he's like, "Dad, I feel like I need to defend so and so against this guy." I said, "Yeah, you do. If you have the capability to do that, then you have the responsibility to do it." And he said, "I just don't want to get in trouble with the principal." And I thought to myself,
you let Dad worry about that.
That was a failure on my part, because he was more concerned with the principal's opinion than he was worried about mine. And I think as we raise children, what a lot of people will say is they're like, "Oh, just let them be whoever they want to be and express themselves." Kids are dumb. And I say that with all the love in my heart for my children. They don't know they're ignorant about life because they haven't experienced life. And so if we allow them to experience it the way that they want to experience it and express themselves without any set of parameters, we're actually setting them up for failure. So we've got to set the example. We've got to give the parameters in which they can operate and express themselves in these parameters, and make our example the loudest example, so that they actually care about what dad has to say or mom has to say about how they're interacting with the world.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's the kids. I mean, and I look at my own kids, and then, I mean, of course, I can think back on myself at their age. You just don't have the experience to make incredibly complicated decisions. And I remember being that age. I mean, I talked to my oldest son about this. He's 15. I'm like, "Listen, man, I understand where you are in your life." And I remember, I mean, high school, for me, he's a freshman in high school. I did not enjoy the high school experience. I probably was, I mean, I don't know if I'm an antisocial person, but I'm not an extrovert by any means. I probably float somewhere between, closer to the introverted side of the house. Likely could have been described as socially awkward. 150 pounds, 6 foot tall, scrawny kid. It was difficult enough given those physical aspects, and then alone all the different things that I was exposed to. And my parents did a really good job of they always set the table as, "Come to us with any questions that you had." They always left it, there was some very strict parameters that I could operate inside of, but they created boundaries for me that allowed me to make decisions inside of a safety net. Yeah. And I'm trying to replicate that exact same thing with my kids, because, like you mentioned, they just don't have, their hard drive doesn't have enough information that they can access and Rolodex it. So when they encounter something, they know they can make the more appropriate decision without falling into a dangerous trap.
Yeah. I mean, I look around and I see what a lot of kids are doing is falling into a real world scenario of Lord of the Flies, right? And this is what happens when they don't have any parental supervision, and parents are failing at every level, and it's creating some real problems with our kids. So, and the thing I talk about a lot is that our boys, our children, specifically our boys, they're going to want to be like me for the most part. They're going to behave like me. In fact, as I'm sitting around the dinner table, I hear my boys talk and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I would have said that." They sound just like me, right? Because they learn from me. So they want to be like me. My daughter, at some point, she's going to look for a future husband that behaves and acts like me. So I have this huge burden of responsibility.
Well, I was literally yesterday in Portland doing a speech on my favorite topic, which is leadership. And one of the things that I always make a point of highlighting when it comes to the behavior of a leader, whether you realize it or not, everybody that you come in contact with is listening to you and watching you, and they're going to mimic your behavior because of
Sure.
the position that you're in.
Right.
And I always canvass the crowd. I say, who in the audience is a parent? And most of the people raise their hand because I'm talking to an older demographic, and I ask them, how many of you, and I use myself as an example, how many of you have ever seen your children say or do something where your initial reaction was to get upset, but then you realize they learned that behavior and they're mimicking it from you, and the same number of hands comes up because people don't realize, or at least in my opinion, the most important leadership position that you can hold is that of a parent, because you're shaping future generations, and you can generationally fix problems or you could generationally create more problems. But the kids, your children, it's amazing to me. And kids see more than anybody wants to give them credit for, and they hear more than anybody wants to give them credit for. So they may not have the experience, but they have an amazing ability to be a sponge. And if you're not careful, you can set them up for lifetime failure, in my opinion, at least. And in my opinion, my son is at 15 as a freshman in high school, has such a more complex environment to navigate because
Oh,
of things like his phone and social media. I'm almost beyond my experience, my own personal experience level of trying to help him deal with that, because I didn't have that instantaneous access to everybody. And when I said something dumb, it was something dumb that I said to somebody's face, and there was no permanent screenshot and record of it that could, because I've
or
had
the
those
level
issues.
of reach that you have too, right?
Oh. And it's so, so I always tell my kids, I'm like, listen, anything that you do online, please always understand that even though you might be talking to a friend, just assume that anything you put in a device of any size, from a computer to your phone, it's going to live forever, and it could come back to haunt you. And we've had one experience already where, in a moment of being a 15-year-old emotional young man, comments were made, screen grabbed, and the next thing you know, I'm at the school with my
Oh,
wife talking to the
geez.
principal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty crazy. It really is. Yeah. I think that level of leadership is so, it was funny because I was driving with my family somewhere the other day, and my oldest son and I started to get into a little bit of an argument about something. I can't really remember what it was. And we were both kind of heated up, and my wife was chuckling in the passenger seat. And I looked at her, I'm like, what are you laughing about? And she's like, you realize you're
You.
arguing with yourself, right? I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, everything that he's saying right now is you, which is why you're having such a hard time arguing, because you guys are thinking the same. Like, it was just, and I stopped for a minute. I'm like, yeah, that's actually kind of true. It's just so funny what our kids pick up. But yeah, we got to be really, really careful of the information they're exposed to.
They pick up everything, and that's what I constantly try to remind myself. It truly, they mimic and listen, or they're listening and watching to everything, and they will mimic it at the most inopportune moment for you.
Oh yeah, they'll make it really, really uncomfortable. Something you may have said about somebody, they don't bring it up in the confines of, they bring it up to that individual. You're like, duh, you need to understand what they know.
It's like they almost have like this like sonar system. They're like, oh, this is the perfect time for that comment.
Yep. They know how to make you feel completely uncomfortable and inappropriate, for sure.
Yeah. So, you mentioned earlier the experience you had with men growing up in your life. Do you think that played a large role in your desire to create the Order of Man podcast and website and program?
I do, because I think there's a lot of problems with society, and I think everybody sees different problems, right? Which I actually believe is a good thing. Even if people see problems that you don't necessarily think are problems, it's good that we're all looking at things from different perspectives. This is why I think it actually, in politics, people say, well, we can't get anything done. Yes, that's the point. The point is that there's gridlock, and the point is we're looking at things from different perspectives, so there isn't one side or one viewpoint that takes precedence over another. So for me, the problems that I see in society are really a lack of men stepping up, because that's what I experienced in my youth. I didn't have, I would watch my buddies, and they were going camping with their dad, and they were playing, that great American picture where they're in the house with a white picket fence, and they're playing catch with their fathers, and they're rolling around and laughing and having a good time. I'm like, well, why don't I have that? And
Yeah.
sometimes you don't know, right? You don't know because you're in a box. Like you don't really have anything to experience or to compare your life against. So you think, oh, this is just life. So for me, it didn't really manifest itself until I got married and started having kids of my own. And I realized, man, I'm inadequate, just like all fathers are.
Yeah.
But I felt more so. I felt just this complete lack of ability to control who I was, to show up fully for my wife and my 1-year-old son at the time. And yeah, we went through a separation. Long story short, I blamed her for a lot of the problems. But it hit me. I remember the road I was on. I remember the cross street I was on where I thought, you know what? Maybe I have something to do with this. Like
what was the route? What was the route you took out of that? So you were at the road. You remember the crossroad. What was the action plan you put into place for yourself to reverse course?
Yeah. So, let me back up just one quick second, because I remember that the first step was taking responsibility. Like that's the very first step. Because what a lot of people will do is they'll blame everything on everybody else, right? Oh, it's my wife, and if she wasn't this way, and if she was doing this, and she was better here, then our relationship would be better. And I did.
They look for external reasons,
right? And the challenge with that is some of it actually might be true.
Yeah.
Right. And that makes it challenging because that actually relieves you some of the burden of responsibility. Because you're like, well, she's not doing those things. And that's true. She's not. But you can't control that. All you can control is your response and how you're showing up. So for me, I recognized, all right, I actually thought my marriage was over at that point. I thought, well, this is over. So I'm just going to be a good catch for the next woman that comes in my life. I'm young. I'm going to find somebody else. Just how it is. And I didn't want to wrestle with that idea, but I painted that as reality at that point.
How old were you?
20. How old am I now? 20. I was 27, roughly.
Okay.
26, 27, somewhere right in there. And so to answer your question about what path did I take, I started to look at people who were successful in my life the way I wanted to be successful. So my financial planning practice at the time was really struggling, fairly new in the practice, trying to get the thing off the ground and just really struggling. And there was 2 guys in my office who every single week, every single month, day in and day out were producing, and they just had these amazing financial planning practices. So I went to these guys and I said, hey, look, guys, I'm struggling. I don't know how to do this. You guys look like you know what you're doing. Can I just take you to lunch? And both of them were like, yeah, we'll go to lunch with you. And I sat down at lunch and we talked about what they're doing and how they're growing their financial planning practices. And long story short, I actually ended up partnering up with these guys. And through that mentorship, it really helped me turn my practice around for the very first time. So I did that. Then I recognized, oh man, this actually works. So I started to look into my friendship, the friendships that I had. All right, who in here is succeeding with regards to being a father, with regards to being a husband? And so I hung out with, I spent time with those guys and I learned from them. And as I absorbed what it is they were doing, I began to incorporate some of these things into my life. So I really think it comes down to the information that we can consume that literally transforms the way that we manifest ourselves in life.
How long was the process to walk things back from the brink with your wife?
So we were, let's see, we separate. I want to say it was about 4, maybe 5 months. I think we were separated for 3 or 4 months, and that about 2 months of time on really working on myself. So specifically, I started to get my finances in order because the business and the practice were beginning to ramp up a little bit. I lost a bunch of weight, started to get in shape because I was spending time in the gym. And
did you have your ridiculous beard at this point?
No, my beard is, I know. If I would have, it would have been a whole lot faster, man. Like instead of 5 months, it would have been 3 months, but yeah, I've only had my beard for, about 4 years now. So when I started Order of Man.
It's pretty impressive, but sorry, I didn't mean to unhinge you. So you got your finance, yeah. You get your finances in order. You started working on yourself personally. You were starting to shed some of the extra actual literal weight.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, it was about 5 months, and then I remember we had gone on a date, and then I went up to Salt Lake for some training. I'm about 4 hours south of Salt Lake, so I went up there for training, and I remember her calling up and saying that she wanted to come back home. She wanted to move it back home. Which of course I was ecstatic about. That's what I wanted all along. And I had thought our marriage was over. But through that work that I did on myself, not her, and look, she'd be the first to admit, if she was down here talking with us right now, she would be the first to admit that she had her own things that she needed to work on. But I focused so heavily on that for so long that all I did was drive a greater wedge between her and I. Yep. And it wasn't until I stopped focusing on her and left her alone and really just went to work on myself. And this is how we become influential. A lot of people say, like, I want to lead, I want to change the world. Well, you don't change people. You change yourself, and they decide to be influenced by you. So if you want to change the world or just your environment, be more influential, meaning take action on yourself and others will be impacted by it.
Well, there's only so many things you can actually control in life. And if you look at the grand scheme of things, you can't control your kids. You can't control your spouse. You can't control pressures or weights. The only thing you actually have control over is yourself.
Yes. That's 100% true. And you know what? That's all you need to have control over, because people are going to respond to that. It's inevitable. We talked about being an example earlier, and you're talking about leadership. Look, you're already a leader. You're already an example, whether you realize it or not. There's people who are looking at you and you're painting a negative example or a positive example. So we need to just have some intentionality about the example we're setting, knowing that every single one of us in every way is already setting an example and leading people in some capacity.
At all times is the only thing I'd add to that. And people, they want to pick and choose. I find often, I'm only going to lead when I get to work. Well, and it creates a very interesting, because I encounter this in the business world. People who will struggle with leadership, they think that it's associated somehow with their time card. Like if I punch in, not that I think anybody actually punches in anymore.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Metaphorically, right? The time card goes in and okay, the leadership traits, they kick in, but it doesn't work like that. It might for a little bit, but it's a veneer or a facade that can't stand up under pressure. It truly is, in my opinion, at least, something that you have to dedicate yourself to as a human being. And that realization that at all times, like you said, I'm setting an example. It might not just be a good one. It could be a bad one in this moment.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I hear a lot of people talk about is hats, right? Like, oh, I'm wearing my business hat and I'm wearing my dad hat. I'm like, no, there's no hat. You don't get to put on a different hat. There's just life. So the more that you can find congruency between the way you show up at work and home and everything else that you're doing, the more satisfied you'll be. Yeah, you don't get to choose, like, I'm going to be a leader at work, but I'm going to be an asshole at home. No, you're probably an asshole at both.
Yeah.
So you have to be intentional in order to accomplish this consistency and congruency across all aspects of your life.
It's tough, man. I mean, one of the hardest things for me to do when I'm struggling is, and I tell people to do this all the time because it's easier for me to tell people or recommend for them to do than for me to do it myself is,
absolutely.
I'm like, when you're having issues, here's what you need to do. Instead of looking around for the problem, go find a bathroom, turn the light on and look in the goddamn mirror, because that's where your issues are lying. And it's easy to say and it resonates with people, but it's tough for me to do. Like, full disclosure, like the last week has been a difficult one for me, and I'm struggling to figure out why I've been kind of in a rut, for lack of a better term, like a combination of feeling overwhelmed or frustrated or things just not going the way that I want to. And it's so easy to be like, oh, well, I'd feel better if that changed, or I'd feel better if this changed. And the realization I've come to over the last 24 or 48 hours is I was just spending more time looking at myself and realizing I need to do better in this area. I need to stop doing this and start doing that. And then I woke up this morning feeling better because I had a better game plan for myself and the things that I needed to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. I think a lot of people focus so heavily on the externals. Like, I have this objective. I want to make $1 million. And then that's the extent of their focus. It's like, well, that's great. That's a great starting point. But what are you actually going to do about it? And so once you figure out what you want, then you got to figure out how you're going to get it and focus more on that than the attainment of that goal. The more that you can focus on, these are the things I can do to inevitably produce the result, I think the quicker we are to achieve those things.
Yeah, you got to focus on the process, not on the end state.
Otherwise, 100%.
You get overwhelmed. It's, if you're going to walk across, if you're going to go for a 10-mile walk, you're better off looking down at your feet as to where your next foot's going to land, as opposed to, all right, I have 9 3/4 miles left. So I have 9.5, because you just be like, you know what? There's a Starbucks. I'm going to do a pit stop and then just walk home. I'm only a quarter of a mile from home.
Or you're going to look and say, oh, I've gone far enough, or why am I even doing this? And you're going to second guess yourself versus, hey, just focus on the step in front of you and then the next one and the next one and so on.
What are your thoughts on Jordan Peterson?
I think Jordan Peterson's got some amazing information. I mean, I think that the information that he puts out in the world is spot on. I think he's very, very misunderstood. And I think part of that is because he uses some language that people don't fully understand. But the reason he does that, from my perspective, is that when he's talking, to me, what it looks like is he's thinking. Like, you're actually listening to him think, which is why he sometimes talks in circles a little bit and talks in ways that you can't fully understand, because you can't fully understand the thought process of somebody's mind, right? And the way that it works.
He's one of my, if not the favorite guest. Anytime he's on Joe's podcast, I love it because, for one, the long form, so they can dig into an actually nuanced topic. But
For sure.
when he talks, he really, really makes me think, and I think that's why he's one of my favorite, if not the favorite guest, like I said. But I would agree. I think he's wildly misunderstood, and it's very, man, it's very. You either love the guy or you hate the guy. It seems from the outside,
very polarizing. Yeah,
extremely polarizing. But I wish more people would take the time, agree with them. Actually, and on any guest or any topic, I wish people would take the time to think through it and look from both sides of the lens, which I think is missing.
I think so too. But I think he knows what he's doing, and he does it very well, which is to, for lack of a better term, offend people. Like that ultimately that is his objective, to offend everybody. And why do I say that? Is because you can't really affect change in your life until you're offended or stirred up in some way. Right? Because if you think that if you think you're perfect and everything's fine and there's no problems, what are you going to change? Is it even on your radar to change? But if, on the other hand, you're stirred up, you're thinking about these things, or somebody's calling you out, even when I get called out, at first I get offended because I want to defend myself, right? Like, it's my ego. Yeah, I'm pissed. I'm like, what does this guy know about me? But then secondary to that is, wait a second, is he right? Is there some truth to this? So I think we have to be stirred up in a way in order to affect some sort of change in our life. Otherwise, there's no reason to change in the first place.
Yeah, and I also wish that social media, or that ability to immediately respond, had like a 5 or 10 minute delay switch built into it.
Yeah, that would be good. From the time you read it, you can't respond for 10 minutes.
That would be good for everybody.
Like, for sure.
You can respond, but it saves it in your draft folder for 10 minutes, because then at 9 minutes and 50 seconds, you can go, I don't want to say that.
Delete.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Well, again, that's, I think, another trap that people fall into, this ability to instantaneously respond in an environment that has no consequences. So they lose all modicum of civility. It's just gone.
Yeah, I mean, it just brings out the worst sometimes in people, because everybody's impulsive. Everybody's ego-driven. Everybody's selfish. And usually when you're dealing with somebody face-to-face, or that you have some level of respect for, you're going to bite your tongue a little bit, or at least think more about what it is you're saying, because you're face to face. And like you said, there's consequences. I
always use my litmus test is the elevator. Don't say something to somebody online that you wouldn't say in a closed elevator.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah, because and that is a great litmus test. There's somebody that could kick your ass, right?
Well, you never know. But I mean, would you actually say this to somebody in a space where you have no more than 6 feet? And it would drastically change the social interaction that exists in the ether of the internet of things.
Oh, it really, and it would change it, I think, for the better. But there's some people out there who are just so miserable. That actually goes back to the point that you were asking earlier. I think there's this percentage of people who want to complain about the patriarchy, and want to complain about toxic masculinity and how I'm promoting that, or how Jordan Peterson might be promoting that. But then I also think there's a group of people who are just miserable. Like, they don't actually take issue with what I'm saying. They take issue with the fact that I'm saying it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, right? So the connectivity of the world we live in is a beautiful thing, but it's also incredibly evil. I don't know if evil is the right term, but it gives people who are unhappy the same access and volume and voice that everybody else has. And maybe I want everybody to have their own opinion. I want everybody to be able to express it, but perhaps that's not always a good thing all the time.
Well, the problem, see, here's the deal, is that not everybody's voice is credible. Like, some opinions are worth more than others. And some people will hear that and say, everybody's opinion is important. No, that's not true at all. Some opinions are more valid and important than other opinions. And we used to have different systems and checks in place that would actually help us understand this meritocracy, meaning that those who rise to the top and have the voice sometimes have the most credible voices, right? So some of that was filtered. Well, now everybody has the same access, so everybody's voice is given the same credibility, which means that it's on us as individuals to actually decipher whose opinion matters and whose doesn't. And we have opposite ends of the spectrum. We have some people that take everything to heart. Everything that was ever shared on the internet is truth, which obviously we know is not a great way to operate. And then on the other hand, you have these people who believe everything is wrong, right? Or zero F's mentality, like, I don't care what anybody thinks. Well, those opposites, those polar ends, neither one of them are serving you well. The truth is that you probably ought to care about what some people think. I care about what my wife thinks about me. Frankly, I care about what you think about me, because people like you and my wife and the other people that I am inspired by are living the types of lives to some degree that I have aspirations to live by, which means I need to care about what you have to say.
Yep.
Not this zero F's mentality. And you know what? The other thing, and I think you do a great job at this, is not so blind with your faith in following people. Like, you're questioning things, and you're pretty level headed from what I can tell about these important topics like gun control and all these other things that you have broached. You don't sit on one side or the other. You keep a level head. That's important. It's important to try to really decide whose opinion and what information is credible and what isn't.
Yeah, it's funny, man. I find I don't fit into categories well, and I don't know if I ever have for my entire life. Like, I almost always land in the middle on most issues. Like, I seem to tend towards moderation, and I pair that with an inherent distrust in the human species, just from what I've seen with my own eyes. And so it almost is awkward though sometimes, because I see people that are so polarized, and I think that belief and faith and idea is a beautiful thing, but not when it blinds you
Right.
to everything else that is around you. So it's, I don't know, like gun control is a good one, man, or politics is another one. Like, I can understand people's passion, but I can't trick myself into landing anywhere other than the middle. And I don't know. It's just bizarre. So I try to be at least honest with how I represent myself.
It might be bizarre, but I think it serves you and those who do it well. Right. The problem with going with the status quo, or going with a party when it comes to politics, or this idea of tribalism, is that you no longer think for yourself. That's a problem. It's a problem when, just because somebody in some party or some organization tells you that this is the way that, quote unquote, we believe, then you say, oh, okay, I guess this is the way that I'm supposed to do it, without actually giving it a second thought and thinking about how this actually impacts your life and the lives of the people that you have an obligation and responsibility for. It's not a great, in fact, I would go so far as to say it's not even American to not have this sense of independence and critical thinking.
I agree, man. I couldn't say it better, actually. I mean, I will never allow somebody to take the ability for me to think for myself out of the equation, because, like I said, you can be as passionate as you want, but I still inherently, like I said, distrusting most of the human species, I find or feel it's incumbent on me to separate the wheat from the chaff on my own, regardless of the information that's in front of me.
Well, I think there's value. I definitely think there's value in approaching every aspect of life with at a minimum, a healthy dose of skepticism, right? It'll keep you on your toes and keep you aware, and then let other things prove that skepticism to be unwarranted.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know the deal. You do enough laps around the sun, you see enough evil things. You're like, okay, I acknowledge that this exists. Let's be a little bit more cautious in our approach to things and make sure that we're entering into them for the right reasons.
I mean, this is the problem we run into when we hear these people talk about the utopian society, right? Socialism and everything else is like, oh, everybody's happy and everybody's equal, and nobody wants to hurt us. And if only people were happy, then there wouldn't be any violence. And it's like, you've never encountered violence. Like, you've never encountered somebody that hates you so bad that they want to not only kill you, but everything you love and everything that you hold dear. Because if you faced that, you would realize that this utopian society is literally impossible.
I wish that it was possible. I will say that.
Sure,
I mean,
of course,
I
no
understand,
doubt.
Yeah, I understand why people have that desire. It's funny. The first time I did Joe's podcast, that actually came up, and the only way that I could describe to him, or an attempt to describe for him, the level of hatred that somebody is always going to have for you, regardless of your belief, because there's X and Y people, and there will always be somebody who's on the opposite side of the spectrum, was by talking about how much he loves his kids, and how much all parents, they have this, you can't even describe it. It's boundless love for your children. It's not measurable. And as much as you love your kids, there's somebody out there that hates you just as much for your beliefs, regardless of what they are.
Right.
The beauty is most people will never encounter that person, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But if you did encounter that person, it would forever change the lens that you view the world through.
100%. Yeah. And we need to make sure too, that we say that the reason a lot of these people won't encounter these types of individuals is because there's a select few who are willing to keep those people at bay. And so you have these people who live in these utopian worlds that aren't real because they've benefited from the sacrifice of other people and they don't even realize what's actually going. Not only do they not realize it, they don't even want to acknowledge it. Like, they don't even want to take a peek behind the door. They're like, no, 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 no. Ignorance is bliss. Everything's fine. And they remain in this state of ignorance. And you can see it when people talk about these kind of things. It's absolutely ridiculous to me.
Yeah, ignorance actually is not bliss. It's just ignorance. That's what the t-shirts say. Ignorance is ignorance.
Ignorance is ignorance. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, man. It's I don't know. And again, so I always land on the middle. I hear people, and I understand people, people bring up whatever their particular gripe might be. It might be a social economic argument, or oppression is a term that it seems to be the soup du jour recently. And I hear people talking about that, and I just really struggle to land anywhere other than the middle, again, because of what I've seen with my own eyes. And I've also recognized and realized is that you probably can't change that person's opinion either. So arguing with them may in fact be futile.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, especially on social media, like, nobody, unless they have a vested interest in discussing and debating intelligently and civilly and having a meaning
social media
behind
is
it.
Not the medium for that.
No, and it's not even designed to be the medium for that. You think about. Well, here, let me give you another example. Let's take media, for example, traditional media.
Yep.
You've got to take a step back and wonder, okay, what is their objective? Well, their objective is to generate revenue, right? And how do they generate revenue?
Ads.
Right. They have to. Yes, they sell ads. How do they get people to watch these ads? By being so sensational and polarizing that regardless of what aisle you sit on, you are going to tune in. CNN says things, Fox says things, NBC says things, and they don't care if you're on this side or that side, because regardless of what they say, you're going to tune in because you actually absolutely adamantly agree with it, or you despise everything they say. So the more sensational they can make these things, the more it serves them. Yeah, so we've got to understand, like, what is the motive here?
I always try to remind people that, when it comes to things that you see on TV, to use probably the two most recognizable, Fox News and CNN, although it's an interesting exercise in flipping back and forth and watching them discuss the same issue from totally different sides or two totally different universes, their goal and their rating system is the same one that rates and values the Big Bang Theory. They're all playing in the same game. So Big Bang Theory is the most successful show on TV, or it was at one point, so they're making crazy ad dollars. That's the same goal as the news organizations as well. They're trying to sell ads on the breaks. Right. So remember that, because it speaks to their motivation and their purpose.
Which then gives you the ability to decipher what is they're actually sharing and what's relevant and what's credible and what isn't.
Well, yeah, it puts it in from the perspective of, like, this person's just trying to educate me. Then you can view it from the perspective of, oh, I understand what they're actually trying to do. The information might be valid. I'm not saying that there's not valid information to be gained from those sources, but understand their objective. And at the end of the day, they're a for-profit organization, and their shareholders want more for profit.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Yeah. So what's the future of Order of Man look like? What do you got? 5-year plan, 10-year plan? Do you have any goals that you're working towards?
Neither a 5 or a 10-year plan. I operate a lot.
You have a 5-minute plan?
Fly by to the seat of your pants type. Because look, I mean, here's the deal. If you would have asked me what I'd be doing in 4 years, I never would have thought this. And certainly the landscape's going to change, and that's going to create some new. I don't even know what I'm having for dinner tonight, so I don't know where things are going in the next year or two, right? But yeah. I will say this. I think that the more technologically driven we are, and there is some tremendous values. I mean, Andy, you and I wouldn't be connected. We wouldn't be having this conversation. People wouldn't be listening if we didn't have these amazing technological advances, social media, these things that we can communicate, unlike we ever have in the history of the world.
Yep.
That being said, the more we move this way, the more I think the human spirit is going to crave personal, face-to-face interaction.
Yep.
So one thing I've thought about is with my community, most of my community is digital, whether that's our exclusive brotherhood or the podcast or the social media sites. It's all digital. We do some events and things like that, but those are very limited. But they're valuable for the people who attend, and I think they're much more powerful than just having a conversation over social media or even a phone call. So that being said, one thing I've thought that could be really, really valuable, and we're in the very early stages of this, is creating regional and local chapters where men have the structure and the format and the resources that we've been able to provide within my organization and the framework, and then they just get to tap into it and actually have brothers standing shoulder to shoulder, working towards common objectives, dealing face to face, working through their issues together in these local areas. So for me, like my mind right now is so heavily focused on how do we make this work most efficiently for men that literally span the entire planet.
Yeah, to try to make the gap from the digital world to something physical in the real world. I think there's a
And
lot of
not
value there.
and not only that, but I don't know the right term. And what I was going to say is to excuse myself from it, but that's not really the right term because I'll still stay engaged, but to allow these things to happen and not feel like I have to be involved in every little thing, and really realize that there's some great leaders out there. There's some great men out there. I get messages every day from guys who are like, hey, I heard, and even after this podcast, I'm going to get more. Hey, I heard you're doing regional and local meetups. I want to lead one of these things. And I'm getting so many messages. So I see there's a real value in creating something like this.
Yeah, I spend, I would say, about half of my year traveling around doing interfacing with organizations at a variety of levels, whether most often it's generally like a keynote speech and the teamwork and leadership, given my background, or what they generally hit me up on.
Mm-hmm.
And, sitting in a podium or standing at a podium or in a conference room and talking about leadership and practical steps that you can take as opposed to focusing on the conceptual steps, it's not difficult and it is impactful, but I've still, for the last 2 or 3 years, had this thought in my head that there needs to be something more concrete. And for me, that step or leap into being more concrete occurs in the physical / experiential world, as opposed to just the lecture or delivering of information. So I also have been kicking around trying to figure out a way to do something with small groups that focuses on the communication, the teamwork, and the leadership in that visceral environment. Because the lessons, at least for me in my life, and I don't believe in absolutes, so always and never are a tough one for me, but I've almost always, if not pretty much always, found that the lessons that stay with me that are the most concrete, they may have started in that conceptual phase, but once I solidified them in the experiential, real world environment, they were never lost. And so I think there's something huge there about getting those people together.
I think that's right. I think one of the biggest challenges with society is we're losing a lot of these organizations and structures that create commonalities between people. So if you look at church attendance, for example, that has historically and traditionally been an organization that a lot of people can share some common interest. Mm-hmm. The military is another area. I think about in my life, sports, competitive sports is another area where we can all work and focus towards a common good. These things are being dismantled, some intentionally and some unintentionally. But I think the more that we can create this, the better off we're all going to be. And it bands people together to work towards some of these common goods. If you ever want to have a conversation offline about that, I mean, that's some of the events that we've run. Is we've run these events. They're 20-man events, and we do them for 3.5 days. And we bring guys in. We actually just did a couple of months ago did a father-son event. So we had dads bring their boys, and we ran through just a really cool 3 days of connecting these guys and physical challenges and competition. We got them involved in Jiu-Jitsu and shooting firearms. It was just an incredible weekend. So if you ever want to have a conversation about that, man, this is the kind of stuff I love for sure.
Well, we definitely should, because like I said, for the last few years, it's not something that I spend a lot of my waking hours thinking about, but it's something that I can't kick the idea of. So it just leads me to believe that there is definitely meat on that bone for the idea. And I even think 20 people for what I'm thinking about, that might even be large. Even smaller, just high level leadership, but not at a conceptual level, at a practical level where there's consequence. And the events you're talking about, to me, when people ask me what I miss the most about the military or my old community, it's the reality is that I really do miss the camaraderie that I had with the people that I serve with. And camaraderie is a combination of shared suffering and laughter, more or less. And that's what you can develop. You can't, and I don't see that happening online. That's the biggest thing I see missing. And, people seem to think that they're more connected. And I guess depending on your definition of connected, that could be true. But I see, even though we have more connections, we are less connected than we have ever been. Because how do you share suffering and laughter online?
Yeah, you can't, right? I mean, you can share a meme,
Yeah.
That's like the extent of what you can do.
And let's be honest, some of those are pretty funny. I have respect.
They are funny. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the other component that you talked about, because you talked about shared suffering and laughter, is also accountability, right?
Yeah.
Because if you belong to a team, you better pull your weight. Because if you don't, there's going to be consequences to you not pulling your weight. One of the consequences is you being kicked off the team. And part of the human experience is belonging. We don't want to be kicked off the team. We want to belong. And because we want to belong, that's a powerful motivator for doing the right thing in the right environment.
Agreed.
That's positive peer pressure.
For sure. Out of all the Order of Man stuff that you've done coming up on 4 years, what's been your favorite, if you can think of one thing that has either been the most impactful that you've done or and maybe they're the same, the most impactful or the most favorite evolution that you've been involved with?
It's the father-son event. I call it legacy, like hands down. I didn't think it would go this way. There's a lot of things I didn't think would happen when I started this podcast 4 years ago, but I didn't think I'd be trying to bridge the gap between men and boys. Mm-hmm. And that to me right now at this moment speaks so loudly to me. This ability to raise men, to equip grown men with the tools they need to be better leaders, fathers, husbands, business owners, community leaders, and then to be able to bridge the gap and turn around and extend a hand to their boys and say, follow me. That to me has been one of the most powerful experiences. You know, as I watch these guys, one of the things that we did at our event is we had them create a code of conduct. And I told the dads with their sons, I said, okay, I want you to think about this weekend. Here's some of the things we're thinking about. And at the end of the weekend, you are going to create a family code of conduct. And so at the end of the weekend, we had these guys split off with their boys and go into separate areas and really take some time and write down a document that would dictate the way that they behave. And so as they came around back to the campfire, we had some of the boys, we had a handful of the boys actually read the code of conduct that them and their fathers created. And
that's incredibly powerful.
It was so powerful. In fact, I've got mine right here because I took my two boys. Not only did I kind of head up this event and put it all together, I had our event coordinator to be the MC for the event, but I actually participated in it. So I had my two boys here. And I've got my code of conduct. I was up at a friend's place. This is where we held the event. And he has a cabin. And he was doing some remodeling there at the cabin. And there's a bunch of old barnwood that's 110 plus years old. And I said, hey, can I have some of this? And I actually just created a frame this last weekend and framed our code of conduct. But man, I'm telling you, it's such a powerful thing. And it's something that children just aren't getting. And so they're lost. They're confused. There's so much research out there that suggests that these boys and girls are confused about the way that they're supposed to show up. And it's our responsibility, because you talked about our rights and you also talked about the burden. And I use the word responsibility. Like our responsibilities and adhering to those things are always going to be so much more powerful than the rights we think we're entitled to. It's our responsibility to turn around and lift our kids up.
It's powerful, man. I can't think of a better closing point than that. So tell me more about where people can find what you got going on.
Yeah, you bet. Orderofman.com is our headquarters. So you can check us out there. I'm really active on Instagram at Ryan Michler.
Yes,
my last name is Michler. Yeah, I'm active over there. I like the Instagram platform.
Yep.
And that actually goes back to what I was saying about consistency. Like I'm on there posting probably 3, maybe 4 times a day. And people ask me about that. I'm like, I'm not so talented that I can get away with not being consistent, right? Like what I lack in talent and ability, I have to make up for in consistency and just putting in the work.
I'll be honest with you, I struggle to post 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes I'm
Do
just
you really?
like,
Yeah.
What? I don't know. I mean, it's pictures. I'm like, hey, check out this picture.
Yeah. It is a challenge. Sometimes I'm like, what am I going to post about today? And so like, I'll go through my phone. And last night I actually did it. I'm like, I want to post something. What should I post about? And I was just like scrolling through old pictures and I saw a bunch of pictures of my 2-year-old dog. And I'm like, oh, people always appreciate good dog pictures. So I just posted that, you know? But,
I mean, honestly, I feel like a complete work in progress. So I do not feel comfortable myself putting myself out there like you do, you know what I mean? And providing insight or advice, because I look at myself as a complete moron most of the time. Which is why my blog is literally titled Confessions of an Idiot. And people are like, why do you call it that? I'm like, have we ever met? I mean, obviously this should be.
Do you know me? That's
yeah.
funny.
If we've known each other for 5 minutes, you'll be like, oh, that's totally accurate. But yeah, I mean, I respect the ability to put yourself out there like that. It's a bridge that I haven't been able to cross personally.
Well, one thing I might give as a bit of advice, and one thing that I do with regards to social media is I'm mostly talking to myself. Like I'm telling myself the things that I need to hear, right? So if I'm talking about why it's so important that a man works out and why it's so important that he educates himself and thinks for himself, those are all constant reminders for me. So in a way, this is my journal. It's a way that I document tips and strategies and thoughts and ideas and questions that I need to remember because I have ambitions to be this type of father and husband and all the things that I've been talking about.
It's an interesting way to frame it as a journal for yourself.
It really is. And if people are going to get value from it, that's great. I would love for them to get value from it. But if at the end of the day, it just serves me and potentially even my kids, that's another thing. This is like if I were to die tomorrow, I've got 300 podcast interviews that my kids can listen to. I've got thousands and thousands of posts about what my thoughts and views and mistakes and triumphs in life are, and my kids will always have the opportunity to go back and listen to that. So it's pretty powerful if you put it in that perspective.
It really is. It's a beautiful thing. So we got Instagram, Ryan Michler. We got orderofman.com. Where else can people find you? Obviously, your podcast,
the podcast,
is hosted on iTunes.
Yep. Order of Man, and then Twitter at Order of Man.
I like it, man. Anything else to add before we close it up for the day? Even though I know this is probably going to be one of many.
I hope so. Yeah, I've always appreciated our friendship and just getting to know you over the past couple of years and what you're doing. I don't know if you'll ever convince me to get up in the air or anything like that, but I will definitely look forward to our conversations on the ground.
Yeah, it's not really convincing. It's more kidnapping. Similar words.
Is that what it is? Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, right on, man. I definitely appreciate the time.
Thanks, Andy.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is all that I have for you this week. I'm heading out the door in about 12 hours. Actually, that's not true. 24 hours would be more accurate. Head out the door in 24 hours. Going to be on the road, but guess what I'm going to be doing while I'm on the road? That's right. I'm going to be doing podcasts. And I'm going to be adding video to the podcast when I'm sitting down face-to-face with somebody. So I've consistently gotten the feedback that you would like video for the YouTube portion. The camera's here. The camera's going with me on the trip. So hopefully next week will be the first video podcast in the Cleared Hot series because you asked for it. What else? If you haven't written a review on iTunes or rated the podcast on iTunes, please do me a favor and do so. And if it's a terrible review, still do it. And if it's a 1-star review, still do it. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent. If you got a suggestion that could make the podcast better or you'd like to see a change, hit me up. There's a contact button on the podcast page, clearedhotpodcast.com. Or you can write a just nasty review if you want to, and I'll take a look at it and still do the best I can to make the adjustment. And that's it. I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to get anything from the Cleared Hut store or Free Range American, do or don't, totally up to you. But if you do want to get one and you want it before Christmas, please do me a favor and order sooner rather than later. Otherwise, I'm not going to have the chance to get it into the mail. And that is it. I will see you next, or I won't see you, but you might see me next week.